mean, in Iowa, we're leading. We're at the top of the ticket, one of the most endorsed campaigns. And we're going to do the best we can, but we definitely need to make sure that this is a period as opposed to hunkering down just the ground game. We've got to actually do the ground game and find some way to turn up our air efforts in this contest.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. And this is Ground Game. When you ask Democratic voters in the early states which candidate they like, a lot of them mention Cory Booker.
We know in this country that our fates are united, that we have a common destiny. The call of this election is the call to unite in common cause and common purpose. That's how we will beat Donald Trump.
The New Jersey senator gets good-sized crowds. He's had strong debate performances, but he's struggled to break into the top tier of candidates in polling and fundraising. And with less than a month until the Iowa caucuses, time is running out. Senator Booker is our guest on today's episode of Ground Game. Senator, thanks so much for being with us.
It's so wonderful to be on. Thank you for having me.
So we're at this really interesting moment. You have been running for the Democratic nomination for months. We're finally at this critical phase of the primary, less than a month from the Iowa caucuses. And your day job as a senator has suddenly gotten really busy. You are waiting for an impeachment trial to begin. You just finished an all-Senate briefing on Iran. I want to dive into both of those issues. But just first, how is this complicating your life as you try to get in front of as many voters in Iowa and the other early states as possible over the next few weeks?
You know, we thought the final hurdles before the Iowa caucuses would just be, coordinating field operations, getting precinct captains signed up and all of those things. Well, those things are going great. We're seeing a surge in Iowa, lots of energy and momentum. But God, now we have real demanding things going on in Washington. I swore an oath to do this job, and I'm going to do it. So that means classified briefing, possible impeachment trials. I'm on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so the issues we're discussing and dealing with keep me on the phone a lot, even if I'm on the road. So it's just a lot of energy. Frankly, the best, most persuasive success of our campaign has been in direct-to-direct contact. We've met with thousands of people in Iowa, and our conversion rate, in other words, we measure how many people show up and how many sign commitment to caucus cards. It's really high. On the last trip, we saw upwards of 30-40% of people that actually come and hear me will leave committing to caucus for me. So being off the field, so to speak, is a big, big blow to our strategy to win in the caucuses.
What is your strategy to try to grapple with that? Are there other ways that you can try to get in front of these voters over the next couple of weeks?
Well, we are not a big money campaign. I can't write big checks to my campaign to get on TV. Even John Kerry, who was similar to my campaign in polling, he wrote himself a $5 million check, went up on TV. So this is really one of those times where we have a major pressure to try to raise more money so that when I'm not there, we can stay on the airwaves. It's going to be a challenging 4 weeks into caucus for us, where our strengths are going to be under assault, so to speak, from all the things that are going on in our country right now, and our weaknesses are going to be seen because, again, if we can't raise more money in this final stretch, we won't be able to do the things that other campaigns with more money can do to really show presence. Our commercials right now are airing because we got an incredible surge in online contributions last quarter, and that's enabled us to do what we couldn't do before. We've got to find a way to sustain that at a time, frankly, that a lot of the national attention is going away from the primary to other real concerns and even fears, which makes even the environment to raise money online a lot more difficult. So we're seeing a lot of turbulence, but I still have a lot of confidence because of the work we've done over the last 12 months to build what the Des Moines Register, the Iowa Starting Line, called at the very beginning one of the two best organizing teams on the ground.
Your campaign has been pretty vocal at points about specifically how much money you need to raise to keep going. Do you have a target for these next couple of weeks to keep you on the air, to keep your operation going in Iowa while you may be back here in Washington?
Oh, my God. We have measures on everything. We are really a metrics-driven campaign. So clearly we have fundraising goals, and we're going to be really turning to people across the nation as this next last 4 weeks. We know we can be in a position to win the Iowa caucuses because of our ground strategy. We know the precincts. We have incredible endorsements. I mean, in Iowa, we're leading. We're at the top of the ticket, one of the most endorsed campaigns. We have, elected officials, former elected officials, key activists, community leaders. We have a really good caucus strategy that the local media there really has taken notice of. And we're going to do the best we can, but we definitely need to make sure that this is a period as opposed to hunkering down just the ground game. We've got to actually do the ground game and find some way to turn up our air efforts in this contest.
I want to get back to the ground game in the campaign in a minute, but first, you did come out, as I mentioned, of a all-Senate briefing on Iran. What is your takeaway from that briefing? Were you persuaded by administration officials that there was a real rationale for the targeted strike that President Trump ordered on the Iranian General Soleimani?
Well, it's very hard to be persuaded when you're presented with scant to no evidence of the imminent threat that they were claiming. It was one of those all-Senate briefings that you see people walking out visibly angry. In fact, Republican Mike Lee was so angry, he just vented when he came out to the gaggle of media that were there about the lack of evidence that was even presented, not to mention, maybe we would have issues with the evidence, but there was very little presented in those 75 minutes that I think left a lot of folks frustrated. So I remain skeptical whether they had the authorization, the necessary legal standard was met to do this kind of intervention. And then in the larger perspective, the strategy in that region of this president has been disastrous. What do they get from this? First of all, in the immediate, there may be a cessation of hostilities after last night's attack, and that's still maybe. We still don't know. But Iranian influence and instability in that region has grown dramatically since this president has taken office. Iran's presence and influence in Iraq has grown. Iran's presence and influence in Syria has grown. Iran's presence and influence in arming Hezbollah in Lebanon has grown. They're doing naval exercises with Russia and China. This is a president who has taken us from a point of where diplomacy was working to a point now that Iran is more influential, creating more instability, and on top of it all, racing towards higher levels of enrichment, turning its back on the Iran anti-nuclear deal, and having a shorter and shorter breakout period as they make progress in their enrichment. So this is, to me, such a clear moment where we have a president in office who does foreign policy by tweet. He has no impulse control. He catches his generals off guard. And this recklessness has led us into a time where military conflict is far more likely, where we're moving more troops back into the region, when our troops and officials that are there are more under risk, and where our strategic objectives, which we all should agree on, not having Iran have a nuclear weapon, making sure that ISIS is not only beaten, but it has no chance of regrowing. There are so many strategic objectives that we know that this president now is in a weaker position to make happen.
Do you think with this happening now, as I said, just a few weeks before the Iowa caucuses, does this change how Democratic primary voters are going to be assessing their field of candidates? Does it change what they're looking for in a nominee?
I can't tell you any objective view of that. I know my experiences, obviously, just coming out of Iowa yesterday, there are many more people who are asking questions about foreign policy. But as far as the calculations, I don't know. I know that being a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, being in the Senate, having visited with military and diplomatic leaders everywhere from Afghanistan to Baghdad, this is an area of strength for me to show that I not only have a mastery of these issues, but I'm prepared to be commander-in-chief. But how that plays out in the election, more objective minds will have to look at that and evaluate that for themselves.
How would you say that your experience in this area lines up against somebody like a former Vice President Joe Biden, who's making that same case, that he's been on the Foreign Relations Committee for years, certainly was vice president, was involved in a lot of major national security decisions during the Obama administration?
Well, this is a dynamic of the campaign that I've talked about a lot over the course of this year. I'm happy to tell you about my plans versus his plans, and frankly, why I'm the best person to be commander-in-chief. But I always worry about when Democratic candidates begin to pick at other Democratic candidates, just because of my worry that we're going to go through what we went in the last presidential election, where we did not have a unified party. I'm the best person in this field to lead this nation, not just because of some of the foreign policy issues of right now, but the totality of the challenges the next president has. I'm putting myself out there because this is a time in our nation where we need to heal as a country. We need to come together, deal with our challenges, and seize our opportunities. And I think I can lead this nation best to do that.
One of the opportunities that candidates have to make their case to voters is certainly in the debates. There's a debate coming up next week. At this point, you haven't qualified for that debate based on the polling requirements, and you've been pretty vocal about your frustrations with the DNC, with the rules for getting on the stage. You talked about not being able to be on the ground in Iowa being frustrating for your campaign. How damaging is it to your campaign, your ability to raise money, to appeal to voters, if you're not on the debate stage in the lead up to these final contests?
Well, as I heard from Democratic colleagues in the Senate today, as local media has been calling this out as a deep wrong. I mean, you have people like the Iowa starting line saying, if people are calling you for polls, if you haven't made up your mind, just mention Cory Booker, because there's no way he shouldn't be on that stage. He's got one of the top campaigns in the state. We know that Iowa's Democratic Party leadership has made the same point. We know that New Hampshire's Democratic Party passed a resolution saying, why are you not having one of the strongest candidates in this race? And so we know how competitive we are right now in Iowa. And for Iowans to have their choices, or at least a chance to see the top candidates on the stage being decided by Democratic leadership in D.C. and not the people of Iowa, is just insulting. And it is going to have an effect on our campaign, as did the last debate not being there. Now, look, we saw good fundraising coming out because I think a lot of people were just angry about it. We had one of our better fundraising nights on the night of the debate, because of such a reaction that in the absence of me and, frankly, people with different lived experiences, more diverse lived experiences. So I don't know what this is, but it is not a good thing for our democracy, for our Democratic Party, rather. And it's definitely not fair to Iowa voters that one of the top endorsed campaigns, one of the highest net favorability campaigns, were number 3. One of the best set of organizing campaigns. Just look at the local media, what they're saying about our organization on the ground. So to have one of the top 5 or so campaigns not on the debate stage, it just makes no sense. It's unfair. And we don't know if I'm going to make it or not. There's still some polls coming out, and that's another point. They're basing it on polling, and there's been a powerful dearth of polling. This is one of the periods where there's been the least amount of polls coming out to even make this determination, and to use polling in a state where right now, 1 month before Iowa, John Kerry was polling at 4%, John Edwards was polling at 2%. They were polling 6th and 7th in the field, and then they went on to finish 1 and 2 in Iowa caucuses. So even the metrics that they're using have not been predictive, and so it is frustrating.
So this metric, Tom Perez, who's the head of the DNC, says, look, there have been 20 qualifying polls for this debate. The qualifying threshold is 5% in at least 4 of those. You would argue that 5% is too high to be a qualifying threshold at this point?
Yeah, it would have excluded John Kerry, who became our nominee.
Do you think that it says anything about your strength as a candidate, though, how you're polling at this stage of the race, or you think that's irrelevant?
I think that every president we've elected in my lifetime, Jimmy Carter, 1% a few months before the election, Bill Clinton, low single digits before. Every president we've elected have been younger, dynamic, come from behind candidates. In national polls, Barack Obama was 15, 20 points behind Hillary Clinton. He was way behind Hillary Clinton and black voters in South Carolina even. These polls have just never been predictive of the people from our party who best go on to be president.
The good news is that we finally get some votes soon. We don't have to rely on polls. Iowa, as we've been mentioning, less than a month away. Where do you have to be coming out of the Iowa caucuses in order to have a viable path to the nomination?
Well, we're going to upset expectations, and whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, but we will definitely upset expectations, which means that we will be one of the top stories coming out of Iowa, and we will have momentum at our back. Right now, I think a lot of folks are frozen or see a big field. Coming out of Iowa, there'll be a much reduced field, and I know that we'll be at the top of that field.
Are you committed to staying in the race beyond Iowa, regardless of how the final tally looks in those caucuses?
Look, I'm in this to win it. I really am. That's why months and months ago, when we saw our money drying up or not having the resources we needed to win, is a better way to put it, we were just very blunt with people and said we don't have a pathway to victory unless we raise, by the end of this quarter, $1.7 million. We ended up raising $2.5. that ended up just triggering a lot of dominoes for us that gave us even more momentum, even more fundraising. It was an amazing stretch leading to our best fundraising quarter, which was just the end of last quarter. So I'm just candid with folks. I'm not in this for a vanity play. I'm not in this just to have more media opportunities. I'm in this to be the next president of the United States, and I believe that I'm the best in the field. If our pathway to victory ever closes off, I'm not staying in. Right now, we see coming out of Iowa, if we upset expectations, we will be like a freight train going downhill because especially as the states begin to get more diverse, we know that that will be even more of a strength for our candidacy and our campaign.
But it sounds like what you're saying is you will have to wait and see what those results in Iowa are before making a decision on whether you're going to continue. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that's a fair statement, but I'm telling you right now, we know from our internal metrics that we are going to finish in a pretty exciting place in Iowa. Granted, lots of things change between now and then, but the confidence that we have, the crowds we're still drawing. One of the local papers just wrote that it's almost like when you go see Cory Booker, it's still like he is polling in the top 3 or 4 because we are still getting big crowds. And then the energy afterwards, county chair people, Democratic Party county chair people standing up and saying, I'm endorsing this guy. I'm going to be there for him. This is all momentum that's building for us. Now, as I said, if this trial lasts 2 weeks, that is literally dozens probably of events that we won't be able to do where we can get that kind of reaction. But I have such confidence in what we've built over this year that we are going to upset expectations and get the momentum we need to turn the corner from Iowa and New Hampshire and get into everywhere from Nevada, where my mom lives, to the Carolinas, where my dad is from. These are even more diverse states that are very home turf to me, and we're going to do an extraordinarily well then really cleaning up towards the nomination.
You've somehow managed to place family members across all of the early states. It's amazing.
Well, here's a surprise for you. My grandmother was born and raised in Des Moines. And,
yes, I've heard.
Yes. So we've got about 85 family members there to be caucusing for us. So it's really.
What about New
really
Hampshire? Do you have like a third cousin in New Hampshire somewhere?
I was just telling Maggie Hassan that it was the one state I had absolutely no connections to, but we quickly racked up a whole bunch of endorsements. And so, amazingly, in New Hampshire, we're one of the top 3 campaigns in endorsements in that state from local leaders. So it's exciting that even without family there, we've got 20 state reps and 3 state senators and just a lot of folks who are mayors and other folks who are stepping up for us to fill the family gap.
As we wrap up here, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that you try to avoid targeting some of your Democratic rivals. This primary has, I think, been surprisingly collegial with a couple of exceptions here and there. And one of the things I heard you mention earlier in the week is how much you text with Andrew Yang. I've heard from other candidates that they text and talk to you a lot. What is that dynamic like between the candidates who are all running, and just how often are you guys all in touch?
Well, I feel like I'm a nexus in this race where I have just good friendships across the board and real friendships. I was just sitting on a couch with Michael Bennett when Kamala walks in. She and I hug. I mean, these are friends and partners. Joe Biden swore me in. I was just laughing with my girlfriend who was telling me about how one of the best wingmen I've had in our relationship was when Joe Biden pulled her aside and started telling her how amazing I was as being a potential president.
That was during the primary he did this?
It was as we were going into a debate. Joe Biden steps up and a solid to him for being one of the most persuasive arguments that Rosario Dawson should double down in her relationship with me. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, I do not feel comfortable when I see other candidates attacking the character. Let's disagree on our plans, on our vision for the country, and there's substantive difference. I mean, do you believe in a price in carbon or not? Do you believe in gun licensing or not? These are real things that we could argue. But Joe Biden is a statesman. Andrew Yang is a decent, kind man. Bernie Sanders, as prickly as he can be on the outside, and I tease him about it all the time, he is a righteous warrior for justice. All of them are. So this idea that we should tear each other down is only going to make us weaker as a party when we don't need to just win the White House. We've got to send Mitch McConnell to the back benches. We need to unite. That's where our strength is going to come from. We need to elevate each other, not denigrate each other.
So does that mean you'd be willing to serve as vice president to any of those folks if you're not the nominee?
I will break news right now and say I will consider actively all of them to be my nominee, my vice presidential nominee.
To be your vice presidential nominee. Man, you got to try. You got to give me credit for trying, right? Senator Booker,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I know it's a really busy day on Capitol Hill. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us on Ground Game.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be on. I love getting into the weeds. I appreciate it.
Thanks. We'll talk with you soon.
All right. Bye-bye now.
As we wrap up this episode of Ground Game from the Associated Press, some exciting news. We're now airing twice a week. That's right, double the dose of political news from the Beltway and beyond. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. From the Westwood One Podcast Network.